Cleveland Iron Range Highway will now pay tribute to a late state senator. In August 2022, Senator David Tomassoni died from ALS, and today the state Senate passed a bill designating part of Highway 169 in his honor. The stretch between Marble and Mountain Iron will now be called the Senator David J. Tomassoni Memorial Cross Range Expressway. Tomassoni lived in Chisholm, which falls along this 40-mile stretch. He often advocated for improvements to that highway during his 3 decades in the legislature. But fellow lawmakers say he was known for much more than his policy work.
There are very few humans that you meet in life that have the charisma that David had. Anyone who had the opportunity to meet him felt that charisma and were brought in to the warmth that he brought into this world.
The bill passed the Senate unanimously today, and shortly after the vote, lawmakers held a moment of silence. The governor is expected to sign the bill into law tomorrow, with Tomassoni's family there to watch.